this way. You'll also be pleased to know that I don't like to drag things out. That's the good news. The bad news is Lorraine was 90, and my siblings last night, 3 of them, encouraged me to add some fun and have some humor involved at this stage. And I wasn't really prepared for that, so I had to add a couple of stories. So hopefully that will make it, if not more poignant, at least entertaining. So my mother always said that she wanted to write a book. And she knew what the title was going to be. The title of her book was going to be All the Things I've Seen and Been Nowhere. And she said that for decades. In fact, over 20 years ago, I bought her a compact tape recorder with lots of tapes and lots of batteries and encouraged her. And when my father was alive, he was supposed to get her talking. And if you knew Lorraine, you know once you got her talking, she would go on. And it never really worked out. But today this eulogy is titled All the Things I've Seen and Been Nowhere. So I'm going to give you Lorraine's book in 4 chapters. And the first thing I want to do before we get started is remind you, those of you who saw her at the viewing, she was dressed in royal purple, the color of royalty. Her coffin is royal purple. Lorraine was royalty. She lived between 2 worlds. She lived between the world of being a queen, knowing she was a royal son of God, and the world that she came from, the world of poverty and living on a farm and being one of 12 children. And her life was the juxtaposition between those 2 worlds. She wanted to be a queen. She wanted everything that royalty deserved: freedom, jewels, style, shopping. She always wanted to look her best. And even today, she looked her best. Thank you, Teresa, for carrying on that tradition. So I'm going to tell you a quick story about what it takes to look your best. My brother Leslie, rest his soul, and I shared a bedroom together, and we shared a bed together. And my mother would work the hospital shift. She would go in early in the morning and get off at 3 in the afternoon, and then go to the nursing home and do a shift at the nursing home. And she worked hard. And my brother and I played hard. But when we got to bed, we had this little issue about whose side of the bed was whose. And each night we had a little ritual called chop chop. So whoever's body part got on the other side of the bed, it was chop chop, and then the fight was on. And my mother, in her beautification process, she always wore her hair up. And she would wrap it with toilet tissue at night. And she would sit in a recliner with cold cream on her face and read what was affectionately known as the Wish Book, a giant Spiegel, Sears, or Penny's catalog. And she would flip through that about all the things she wanted when she was true royalty. And then the fight was on in the bedroom. And she would yell, "What does it take to get a little peace and quiet around here? I'm going to come in there with the spoon." For those of you who don't know, the spoon is the wooden spoon, okay? And it's used on the backside for correction. And so we would, of course, continue with our spat and the fight and the noise and disrupting my mother's rest. And she would come in with that Spiegel catalog, white face, toilet paper wrapped hair, and beat us into laughter. She was a smart woman. That catalog left no bruises, no marks. So beauty comes as a price, but she was royalty. She didn't realize it, I don't think, her entire life. But that her nowhere was our somewhere. We all come from somewhere, and we need to accept that and embrace that. So to her book, chapter 1. This chapter is titled R, for remember you are royalty, each and every one of you. 1 Peter says, but you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. And my mother was called out into that wonderful light. She was royalty. And I watched the movie, the Netflix movie, The Crown. I don't know if anybody in here has seen that. You can nod your head if you did. Engage with me. Queen Elizabeth, at 26 years old, was an emotionless person. And to rule a country required that she remain steadfast and emotionless. It didn't mean she was without compassion, but it wasn't until I watched that movie just a couple of years ago that I realized that was my mother. She was like the Queen of England because she was emotionless. The first and only time I ever saw her cry was when she first saw my brother at the funeral home. It's the first and only time. And I realized that in order to do her job the best that she could, to offer the best care she could in her vocation, thank you, Father, was that she needed to separate emotion from compassion. So she was compassionate, but she never got emotional because it would have interfered with her job. And it's taken me years to realize that it didn't mean she didn't love me, even though she didn't show emotion to me. So, remember your royalty. No one is better than you. Chapter 2 is E for embrace. Embrace your passions and your strengths. And that's what my mother did. She embraced what it was she did. Her love language was shopping for other people. It wasn't just shopping. She was always thinking of other people and getting them the best gifts. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren will attest to that. I promise you, their closets are probably full. Probably as full as my mother's. You laugh. But her love language was service to others, offering others compassion, and offering others gifts. She didn't give us the emotional gifts, but she gave us gifts. That's how she showed and shared her love. And she walked between those two worlds again. You see her house, it's an homage to where she came from. You've got antiques and kerosene lanterns and outhouses and chickens and all the things. And it's a reminder of her life as a child that she loved and adored, but it reminded her of poverty, but it also reminded her of family and siblings and a time in her life that was absolutely marvelous. The time she spent with her siblings on Peanut Rock. That was what she remembered, and it went through her whole life. She was able to take that with her. Work was also her passion. Her grandkids and great-grandkids became her passion. Chapter 3, S, we're almost there. Surround yourself with who and what makes you happy. This brings us to the chickens. Those of you who have ever been to Lorraine's house or knew Lorraine, she had a thing for chickens and roosters. I'm not going to call it a compulsion, maybe an obsession, but she did have a thing for chickens. And I realized after spending countless hours, I tallied it up, over 1,000 hours I've spent on the phone with my mother. Over 1,000 hours. Every Sunday I'd call her and we would talk for an hour, at least. And as time went on, it got shorter and shorter. It was a struggle to go 30 minutes and then 20 and then 15. But I called her every Sunday, 5 o'clock. And if I didn't call at 5 o'clock, she called me. Is there something wrong? Right? You didn't call. I thought something was the matter. She was ready to call the authorities. But she was surrounded with chickens. And it goes back to her time growing up on the farm. One of 12 children. She and her twin sister. The way her father ran the house was he would dish up the plates for everybody. They didn't have much, so the older boys got dished up first. And because they were workers, they got bigger portions. And by the time it got to Loretta and Lorraine, they got to share a chicken wing. And if it was eggs, they had a spoonful of scrambled eggs to share. And she relished eating chicken. She relished chickens. She didn't have pets, didn't have toys. They had chickens. Those were her pets. So she surrounded herself all her life with what made her happy. Chickens and roosters. And we still have plenty of those. Which brings me to surrounding yourself with what makes you happy. In the final years, she found Bob. Bob made her happy. And they spent a lot of time together. Bob, gentleman, 10 years her senior. Kind of hard. They never stop being your parents, right? We never stop being your kids. But Bob was at her house a lot. Eventually he moved in. So when I would call, and this is one instance where it became clear to me that my mother had stepped into a new phase of her life. She was then in her late 80s, and I called her up on the phone, and we're talking, and all of a sudden she stops the conversation, and it goes like this. Bob, put some pants on. I'm talking to Rodney on the phone. He was 10 years her senior. I can't get that vision out of my head. Paramore and Depends. It's just... So I called her out. I'm a good Catholic son, and I called her out, and I said, Mother, I said, all these years you've spent raising us, trying to do it right, and here you are, you're living in sin. What's going on? I said, you're shacked up now. He's moved in, you guys are shacking up. And it's probably the only emotion I ever got out of her. She just kind of chuckled, and she goes, well, I guess we are. Never occurred to her that it might be viewed that way. Chapter 4, T. These chapters spell rest, by the way, if you haven't been following along. This is how you find rest. T is for trust. Trust that if you do your best, it is enough. God knows I'm not a perfect man. My mother knows I wasn't a perfect son. My wife knows I'm not a perfect husband. And my children know I'm not a perfect father. It doesn't mean I wasn't the best. And it doesn't mean my mother wasn't the best. She wasn't perfect. The message she leaves with us is don't let your desire for perfection get in the way of excellence. Do your best and know it will be good enough. I love my mom and I'm proud of my mom. And something that she didn't give to all of us, and I'm going to give to some of you today. Ryan, your mother loved you. She's proud of you. Jermaine, your mother loved you. And she's proud of you. Denise, your mother loved you and she was proud of you. And Rochelle, your mother loved you and she was proud of you. She didn't tell us that, but I'm telling you now, it's in the book she wrote. So remember this, as you go out, if you want rest, remember that you're royalty. Embrace your passions, surround yourself with people that make you happy, and the things that make you happy, and trust that your best will be sufficient. And now I'm going to finish with a poem from Dylan Thomas, which is my mother's fighting spirit. It's at Villanelle. I went to college. You get a little bit of that liberal education. You're going to go secular for a moment. Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise women at their end know dark is right, because their words have forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good women, the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild women who caught and sang the sun in flight and learned too late they grieved it on its way, do not go gentle into that good night. Grave women near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage Rage against the dying of the light. And you, my mother, there on this sad height, curse, bless me now, with your fierce tears I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying.